You want to know how to survive Scorched Earth, don't you? Well, I've got just the guide for you. Not everyone's a cowboy native to the desert, and even if they are, well, it doesn't guarantee survival. What does is listening to me explain the big idea to you. We're going over 7 main topics in this video so as to provide you with the most relevant information while wasting as little of your time as possible. These topics include the biomes, weather events, resources, creatures, artifacts and caves, explorer notes, and the Guardian. So without further ado, grab your pistols, shoot that subscribe button, and let's get right into it. Scorched Earth kills you a lot. First and foremost, be prepared to lose your sanity while you get mauled by every manner of small to medium-sized carnivore around. Knowing how to outmaneuver them in the early game is going to be critical, which is why we're starting with the Badlands biome. This region is commonplace in most spawn zones and acts as a bit of a mediator or connector between all of the other biomes. You'll find your average Scorched Earth and base game creatures dotted around, usually in some all-out war amongst each other. The Badlands are also characterized by loads of jagged rocks, where you're typically in somewhat higher elevation, cruising around on large, flat chunks of stone. Eventually though, you're bound to stumble upon the next region, the canyons. These lovely little inlets are where you're bound to find a plentiful supply of water. Other than the capros, they can be home to nice areas to build, especially given how little dehydration matters in the area. You should also watch where you step, because one slip and you could go falling a very long way, and trust me, the water won't forgive your carelessness. It's rather shallow. On the other hand, if you're looking for a region with perhaps the least water around, look no further than the endless dunes. These beautiful hills of sand look majestic, but make no mistake, they're home to many creepy crawlies and some rather large carnivores. Bugs roam all around the dunes, and with the deathworms and Phaseolasuchus swimming about, you could get caught off guard pretty easily. The dunes have an occasional oasis spread about, but mostly it's just a whole lot of nothing, except for, of course, the rather dumbed down ruins, which you'll find on the outskirts of the map, representing the sunken city of Nosti and another abandoned settlement with a huge manticore-themed gladiator arena. If you're in the need of wood, look no further than the high desert. This biome is near and around the mountains oftentimes and has loads of trees, perfectly ripe for the grinding. The downside is that you're also going to find a lot of carnos and other harmful goobers that'll make your life hell. If you like a challenge though, keep climbing until you reach the mountains biome, because this is where you're going to find some of the most dangerous creatures, as much as they're usually on one slope or another very prone to slipping off. Ripe with plenty of necessary later game resources, the mountains are a region you're going to actually visit a lot. Just be warned, they are nearly impossible to navigate without some kind of flyer because of how steep so many of the inclines tend to be. In contrast to the steep mountains, Scorched Earth's low desert is quite honestly one of the flattest areas in the map. It tends to be a common spawn zone, and a good one at that, especially for mobs. Yes, like the rest of the map, it is still dangerous, but relative to everything else, it's honestly rather tame. I see a lot of people build bases in this region because of how chill it is. Go figure. While I don't necessarily consider the oases as biomes myself, the wiki classifies them as such, and they might as well be mentioned. The 3 obelisks have their own kinds of oases under them, which are home to loads of early game resources. Plenty of water, cactus, bushes, and so on. They're great landmarks to meet up with friends, but stick around too long and you might get eviscerated by Caprasuchus. And while Caprasuchus can be a huge threat early game, they aren't going to be as much of an overall danger as some of the weather events you can experience in the desert. There are 3 major actual hazardous types, which include an electrical storm, a sandstorm, and your not-so-average heat wave. The electrical storms are honestly really lame. They can look pretty cool from a distance, but the lightning that peppers the ground doesn't actually do anything. The storm itself just causes a perpetual inability to use tools that run off gasoline, as well as cryopods and other tech. So while the storm is a bit of a pain in the ass at the most inconvenient times, it isn't really all that dangerous. On the other hand, the sandstorm event is easily the most hazardous and horrifying. See, when it begins, you're going to start to see a huge wall of sand slowly making its way from one side of the map to the other, starting out in the dunes. I was pretty terrified my first time seeing it, since it looks like it's about to devour you and everything you hold dear. Once it finally engulfs you, just like an ASE, it prevents you from moving fast and rapidly drains your stamina, slowing down tames too. Generally, this can be a huge threat if you're caught out in the wilderness and not on a flyer, but even then, it's always good to be careful, perch somewhere safe, and ideally hide in a tent to stay insulated from the negative effects. The last major weather event, other than rain, which is self-explanatory, is the heat wave. On ARK, everything is turned up to 11, and the heat wave is no exception. This event will cook you more than the unforgiving desert already does, believe it or not, and you're pretty much just screwed no matter what unless you have incredible ghillie or desert cloth armor. Only the most insulated survivors will withstand the intense heat, so I'd recommend doing everything you can to prepare for the inevitable. On the other hand, you could just die repeatedly and respawn to solve the problem. To each their own. If you've mastered the island, you're probably already used to how a lot of the resources come to spawn on Scorched Earth. For example, metal, obsidian, and crystal are found on and around mountains. Need wood? Find trees. Fiber? It's everywhere. The basics don't really need to be elaborated on in this video, but there are a few new resource types on Scorched that don't appear on the island. For example, sulfur is a new type which can be found on mountains and used to craft propellant, a necessary ingredient for things like the newly added flame arrows and flamethrower ammo. Then you've got salt, which is found on both the northeast mountains and out in the dunes. This is generally used to preserve things, since Scorched Earth has different spoil timers for resources, which preservation salt will help mitigate when placed inside of a vessel with your given foods. The last major Scorched Earth resource type is silk, which you'll gather from various plants, but primarily Lymantria, one of the creatures I'll be going over momentarily. Silk is used for desert cloth armor, tents, and whips, but beyond those items, it doesn't have all that much usefulness. If you're wondering where to find silica pearls on a map like this, head over to the bodies of water in the canyons. You should find a decent amount scattered around in the murky waters. The last important resource to go over are the two types of veins. These include water and oil veins. Oil veins are dotted around the map and allow you to place oil pumps on top of them, which will extract oil over a period of time for you to collect. Water veins, on the other hand, require placing a well on top of, which you can then regularly extract water from. So long as you've played a decent amount of ARK on the island, a lot of Scorched Earth's resources should come fairly naturally to you, and unlike some of the other story maps, are pretty easy and straightforward. What aren't so straightforward, though, are the creatures of Scorched Earth. Sure, it has loads from the island, but it also adds a bunch of new ones. I'm going to go through them with rather basic introductions, but if you want to learn more about specific ones, check out my Hell in a Dossier series, which may or may not have a Scorched Earth video by the time you see this one. Starting with the jerboa, this little guy is found in a lot of the beginner areas, but they're really all around the map. What the Dodo is to the island, the jerboa is to Scorched Earth. Their main purpose is to warn you of impending weather events, making it awfully fitting when Helena Walker named her own jerboa Radar. Another creature you'll find often all around the map is the jugbug. There are two types, oil jugbugs and water jugbugs. Interact with them to grab the respective resources from their butts and drink or collect. They often show their ugly butts in the most dire situations, so don't be afraid to use them as needed. They don't mind. Okay, I think they mind. And speaking of things which do in fact mind, vultures are the equivalent to dimorphodons if they preferred their meat to have first rotted for 7 weeks before they dined. You'll find them often in the dunes, scavenging for corpses and attacking anything or anyone who dares go near their precious roadkill. You really just want to blast these things away with guns because they can be a real pain to hit while riding a tame, and keep in mind they can actually attack your character even while they're riding a mount. And yes, you can tame them, if you're a psychopath. If you'd actually like to tame something you can ride on Scorched Earth though, one of your first bets is probably going to be a Morellatops, also known as the Camelsaurus. These goofy things kind of just bounce around holding water in their humps. You're able to essentially tame them, fill them up with water, and go on adventures with said water being portable. Definitely a useful thing for early game, but beyond, well, that's where a mantis may come in handy. These killing machines are found in the dunes and all over the insides of caves. They hit like absolute tanks, and once tamed, can even hold tools or melee weapons to help you mine or hunt and kill. On the other hand, if you're looking for something a little more peaceful, Lymantria pretty much fit that description perfectly. This is one of those rare Scorched Earth creatures that are actually super averse to fighting and pretty much just want to be your friend, just like real moths, except much bigger. Back in 2016, when Scorched Earth originally released for ASE, Lymantria were taken more seriously as a flyer, but nowadays polluted with the huge number of flyers across the maps of ARK, or even just compared to the native wyverns of Scorched, they're honestly looked down upon. Another creature which hasn't aged that well is the Thorny Dragon. Yes, these territorial lizard dudes are a bit mean, but that's probably just because they're salty for how they only really have one purpose: collecting wood. They aren't good at much else, beyond having some weight reduction to their saddles. They shoot spikes that deliver toxins. Said toxins aren't all that effective though. They pretty much are just a means to an end, that end being collecting copious amounts of wood. If you're looking for something with more than one main use though, the Phoenix fits that description. This legendary firebird in ASE can now come in all kinds of color variants instead of its previous fiery yellow color, and now that they can land, they're that tad bit less annoying to hold in bases. The Phoenix is found all over the map, usually dissolved in a pile of ashes which the heatwave event allows them to wake from. They have a strange, painful taming method, but once you have a Phoenix of your own, you can actually cook meat gasoline and metal in its inventory, kind of like a mobile campfire or forge. Pretty useful on the go, but beyond that, most tribes are probably going to be at a pretty advanced stage one way or another, and before long, the Phoenix's melting capabilities won't be all that special for any given tribe once they have, industrial forges. On the topic of legendary creatures though, the Rock Elemental, seemingly based on the Golem of Prague, is a living, possibly breathing, rock. These things act as ordinary, harmless rocks before deciding they want to f*** your shit up and smash you to pieces, either with their own two rocky hands or by literally hurling a giant piece of the ground directly at your face. Being nigh unkillable, rock elementals are usually best led off of cliffs, but if you actually manage to tame one with blunt force trauma, or in other words, cannonballs to the face, they could be quite useful to have on your side. They can mine stone like a Didicarus and are of course exceedingly tanky. While golems are tanky but at least slow, wyverns, on the other hand, are the complete opposite. Squishy but fast. While these wyverns won't be as easy to kill off as Dany's dragons from Game of Thrones, they do take extra damage from ranged weapons like guns, so if all else fails, shoot it till it dies. But if you'd rather take advantage of these creatures, here's where the Wyvern Trench comes in. This perilous ravine is the home of the wyverns, and it's where you're going to find nests with eggs in them. Steal those eggs, book it, and ideally escape with your life, and once you've done that, yay, you have wyvern eggs. After hatching your own wyvern, you will need to feed it wyvern milk, which you get by knocking out female wyverns and taking it from their inventories. There are 3 different variants, the fire, lightning, and poison, and they each have their own quirks. Generally though, these are just solid traversal mounts that also do a pretty great amount of damage. Unfortunately, another monster that does high amounts of damage is the Death Worm. Qasharak, as Helena described in her dossier on the creature, is pretty much ARK's attempt at miniature versions of the Titanic worms from Dune. Sadly, though, you can't ride them like Timothée Chalamet. They're untamable and mostly just want to rip your everything off. You can kill them for black pearls, but be warned, they do a lot of damage, and even using a Rex or Wyvern to fight them can still be a challenge. Tread carefully, and ideally, without rhythm. Nearing the end, we get to the last 2 creatures of Scorched Earth, which are actually exclusive to Survival Ascended, being added specifically in the remaster. Starting with the Oasisaur, these huge flying crab island dudes are gentle giants and can only be tamed and used if you have the Bob's Tall Tales DLC purchased. They're super rare and found wandering around in the dunes, minding their own business. Taming them involves putting a dead dino essence of a tame you lost into their pool of resurrection and then defending your dead tame's baby version from a horde of vultures. If this strange baby survives all that, you can actually tame the Oasisaur, though it kills the baby in the process. As its minigame suggests, Oasisaurs have the ability to revive dead tames. When Scorched released, it made it so when your adult, breedable tames die, they actually have a death essence thing in their inventories which you can use to revive them at Oasisaurs. A bit weird to add an entire item to every single creature when it dies now, purely for a mechanic of one singular paid creature, but it is what it is. The last creature on our list is the Phaseolasuchus. On the surface level, they seem pretty bland, just mopey old lizard dudes that want to eat you, but it's what they can do under the surface that makes them special. These things can swim around in the ground and deal pretty significant damage to creatures with their various attacks. They seem a little underutilized by the general player base, but whether that's for good reason or not, well, you can be the one to decide. Let me know in the comments. That about does it though for the creatures of Scorched Earth. And since you hopefully have a good grasp on them now and which ones you may or may not want to tame, you might just be ready for the next big challenge. Let's go over the caves. Scorched Earth has 5 in total, 3 of which housing artifacts, and the other 2 being purely for resources, explorer notes, and loot. Pretty much all of the caves on the map are rather deadly, with the Oasis and Trench caves being slightly less dense than the artifact caves. Speaking of which, we'll start with the old tunnels, which is where you're going to get the artifact, the Gatekeeper. This one consists of a whole lot of bugs mostly, like mantis and scorpions, with the occasional rubble golem. It's got a bunch of other horrendous creatures, so if you're prepared to fight, go ahead. Otherwise, like many of these caves, you can just kind of sneak around. This one is especially vertical at the end, so don't be a dumbass like me and fall off repeatedly. It hurts. Found in the mountains to the northwest, the Grave of the Tyrants is a rather cramped cave holding the artifact of the crag. In this one, you'll find a high density of creatures to fight through, as well as some water, which can make it a bit of a pain to traverse. Make sure you're prepared to fight through this one because it isn't as straightforward if you want to try and sneak around. Also, there are oftentimes creatures guarding the artifact. In my case, loads of rubble golems, so make sure you grab it quick and run. The last artifact cave is the Ruins of Nosti, which is found in the southeast and contains the artifact of the Destroyer. You'll find the entrance inside of a rather unassuming church made from a bunch of cubes now instead of the sick asset it used in ASE.
What the fuck?
Nonetheless, once you journey inside, you'll find a huge, vast expanse and eventually the artifact. Stealth is an option here, just bring grappling hooks to be safe, since there are a few points where you'll need to hop over some rather ominous pits. Now, as for the non-artifact caves, let's start with the trench. This one is found inside the Wyvern Trench, the Scar itself, and is home to explorer notes, some resources, and some pretty horrible creatures. I wasn't able to notice any supply drops in it myself, but there might be spawns, I'm not entirely sure. The only other proper cave in the map is the Oasis Cave, which you'll need either a fast water mount, some scuba flippers, or oxygen preserving methods to not drown on your way down like I did. See, this is what happens when you get cocky. Don't be like me. The cave is actually huge and kind of gives me Valguero aberration vibes. I noticed at first there weren't too many creatures, but they actually just sort of started to spawn in on my way out, so it could be that they just have weird spawns, I'm not totally sure. There are a few drops in here for sure though, so do keep that in mind. It's a neat spot. Now, while that does it for the caves, let's talk about what you often find in every single one. The Explorer Notes. Scorched Earth for ASA introduced a new type, which actually affects the island now too, called Bob's Tall Tales, which requires the paid DLC. But ignoring these weird, cartoony, non-canon notes, the main 5 Explorer Note types are from Helena Walker, Sir Edmund Rockwell, John Dakea, and Ryan, as well as the One Who Waits. While there are less total dossiers in Scorched Earth from Helena, that doesn't make it any less of a grind to collect them all. I can say that from rather recent experience. But that shouldn't stop you, right? What actually might just stop you though is the Guardian of the Obelisks, the Manticore. The mythical legendary boss is actually not that challenging. Once you've collected the Wyvern talents required and the 3 artifacts, you'll have what it takes to summon the portal at least. On the other hand, if you want to ensure you beat the thing, you're going to want to take in either an army of high-level Rexes with good saddles that you skillfully whistle around, or you could try the insane tactic that my tribe and I are gearing up to try, which is swarm the thing with high-level Ardentavis. Whatever method you do, make sure you research it plenty beforehand, because nothing is more frustrating than grinding away to amass an army, only for it to be swatted down by a coy manticore that refuses to land. You should be especially mindful of the Manticore's minions, its death worms and its rock elementals, which are a real pain in the ass. Otherwise, all I can say is, best of luck. Whatever you do, you'll probably crush it. The reward for killing the Manticore is 57 element on Gamma, 203 on Beta, and 428 on Alpha, with an additional 5, 10, and 15 plus levels added to your max level for your character respectively. And of course, you get the cool cutscene. Whether you're interested in Scorched Earth for the visuals, the challenge, the creatures, or the fiery new weapons, it's a map that will inevitably test your sanity by causing you to lose it rapidly, but not as fast as you'll lose your water from your canteen, which drains over time, because of course it does. Nonetheless, Scorched Earth, while having not added much from ASA, mechanically compared to ASE, at least acts as a more polished map than it did before, and for that, I think there is something to appreciate there. But what do you think about Scorched Earth? Is it a map worthy of playing? If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more. And as always, I'll talk to you next time. Bye everyone.